Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Oscar Hoyle. I'm the Chief Exec from Blossom LGBT CIC, and it's a pleasure to have you join us today. So we're going to be looking at a fantastic topic, which is all centered around stepping up as a leader. So I'm really excited to be running you through today's content. I really hope that we've got some interesting bits and pieces to look at together. I've tried to make it as low on the dry side of content as we can, so that nobody wants to kick off their week with like a boring long talk about who knows what. So we're going to keep it interesting and engaging for today's session. So I won't blabber on for too long. Let's get kicking, shall we? So before we do, I just want to tell you a little bit about me, right? Because what's the point in having someone talk to you about leadership if you've got no idea who they are? So I used to joke and I used to say that I have a day job and a gay job. Now I just seem to have a ton of gay jobs, or more professionally queer jobs, I suppose. So my main job is chief exec at Blossom LGBT, and you'll hear all about us later on in today's webinar. But beyond that, I'm also a director of an organisation called Trans in the City, which is the largest global collaboration of organisations working towards trans inclusion on a global scale. And I have a wealth of experience both in the charity sector and beyond as a leader. So I'm really excited to be able to share some of my journey with you over the next, we're going to say roughly hour, but let's see how it goes really. Blossom is a not-for-profit organisation who work with the mission to empower the amazing things that queer young adults can achieve in their social and professional lives. This manifests in so many different ways across our work. We have a one-to-one mentoring scheme, which again, we'll come back to at the end of this webinar. But if you are interested, do get in touch with us about that. We provide a couple of digital social spaces across the country, as well as piloting a lot of in-person work in Surrey and across southeast of England at the moment, including employability classes, life skill workshops, social and wellbeing spaces, and art approach too. So we do a huge amount of work, and this webinar today is part of our employability and upskilling program as well. Today's session, there's going to be the opportunity to play along and to ask me questions as we go. So if you want to get involved, you can scan the QR code on the screen and it will give you the opportunity to answer some polls, play around with some questions as we go through today's session. If things spring to mind that you're not 100% comfortable with that I mentioned, or that you want to learn more about, all you've got to do is pop it in that app and you can ask the question anonymously. Or if you would prefer to use the comment section on wherever you're watching, they'll also come straight through to me as well. If you drop out for any reason, that QR code is going to stay at the top of this content throughout today's session. So do feel free, ask questions, get involved, leave comments through the Slido app, because I think it's a fun way to make it less just me talking at you. So what we're going to do is to just run through how we can use that platform. So just very briefly, you can see at the top here, you've got the Q&A section. So that's where you can ask me questions as and when we go through the session. If somebody asks a question that you think, that is a good one, then all you've got to do is hit that thumbs up button next to the question and it will upvote it. And what we'll do is, if we start to run slow on time, start to run out of time, I can pick the questions that have got the most upvotes to make sure that we answer the most pressing things in the room. If polls, quizzes, or things like that don't show up, sometimes it's just a matter of refreshing the website that you're using. If your Wi-Fi drops out, it can occasionally have a bit of an issue. Or you can just slide across from Q&A to polls at the top there, but sometimes it's a little buggy. So we haven't forgotten you if you don't get the chance to answer. There is, of course, a little bit of lag sometimes for some people as well. So if you have internet that's maybe a bit slow, that needs to buffer, it might not get a chance to answer all of the questions, but do feel free to use the Q&A and the comment sections wherever you're watching to join in as well. Just to set the scene very briefly on today's session, what are we talking about? How am I helpful to you? Well, I really want to make sure that we're creating a space that is respectful, where you feel able to ask questions and learn. But there are some real key things that I just want you to keep in mind whilst we run through the session. When it comes to leadership specifically, everyone's going to have their own unique style and approach to leadership. So, whilst I'm going to talk you through my approach and some of the really cool things that I've learned over the last few years, I want you to know that that's unique to me. And if you think that I'm talking a load of rubbish at any point, it's completely fine. Likewise, it's up to you how you use the information that I'm sharing with you today. So please don't feel pressured to. This is supposed to be helpful, but if it's not at any point, turn your ears off. It's okay, or question things. Let's have a chat. If you don't think that something's going to be right for you, it's okay to say, I don't feel confident that I could do it this way. Have you got any other suggestions or things like that? And likewise, you're very welcome to share your stories or experiences throughout the webinar today, but do just bear in mind that this is a public space. So comments, things like that, even if it's on the live stream or the Q&A, will still be recorded. And I think some of us have learned the hard way. Once something's on the internet, it's not coming back. So do just bear that in mind when you leave questions or comments. Fab. So let's just look at what we're talking about. So the agenda today, we're going to be looking roughly at leadership. What we're then going to do is take what we've just learned about leadership and think about how being LGBTQIA+ can influence that take on leadership. And then we're going to have a very brief look at some tools that I think are helpful to have in your toolkit as a leader. So let's start by asking a very broad question, which is, what is leadership? And you're going to be able to hop over to Slido now. So open your QR code and just start throwing some words in. What words do you personally associate with leadership? And I think there's no wrong or right answer here. So just, I'm asking you, what do you think about leadership? So just throw some things in. Feel free to have a go. And I'm not going to argue with you if you get it wrong. So there's no pressure here. We'll just wait for a few of these to come through. Hey, people coming up. Look at that. Look at you all with thinking courage. I'm loving that. So what you don't know is, as you say words, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I have these nightmare visions, right? When I run training in person, that somebody's going to see the fact that as I'm asking people to name LGBT identities, and all of a sudden trans gets massive and takes over the screen, I think to myself, one day Piers Morgan's going to see this and it's going to be all over for me. But luckily, so far, nothing like that has happened. Right, I think these are some great answers. So we're going to pause it here. Thank you for chipping in some things. Team building, telling people what to do, direction, vision, influence, honesty, humility. I love these words. Servant leadership. That's a very interesting term there. Not something that sprung to my mind actually, but thank you very much for popping that one in. Well, leadership is not management. So something that most people I hear say, or a big, massive misconception, is that being a leader is being the same as being a manager. And often, you'll hear it, right? Well, yeah, I mean, before I can promote you to being a line manager, I really need to see some leadership. And I know that for me, when I was stuck in junior positions, I was thinking to myself, what the hell are you talking about? Like, just let me do it. How can I lead if I'm not a manager? So let's just keep in mind that leadership, more than anything, is about your state of mind. And maybe that sounds cringy, but what are the differences? So management is all around delivering on plans, organizing and delegation of work. It's a very task oriented, or I can't talk today, but a very task focused role, essentially. And management can sometimes feel quite transactional. It's about getting things from your staff or the things around you. And it's almost about how you're using resource. So quite often, a lot of people would say, oh, well, you manage a program, you don't manage people. which I think is often forgotten in modern sort of management roles. You know, management level roles is often people think that they are managing people. You're not actually. You're trying to lead people, whereas you're trying to manage a task. And I think that there's a very common misconception there. Leadership, on the other hand, is broader. Leadership is about thinking about the future, inspiring and motivating people around you, and creating a focus on what is the end result rather than um, the task at hand. Leadership is about people feeling part of something. So you look at any leader that you've ever seen before, and what they're doing differently is they're not telling you, you know, how to do something. They're not telling you when to do something. They're inviting you along on a journey. And that's where we start to see powerful leadership coming into play. So we've established differences, right? Management focusing on getting tasks done, you know, bashing out the to-do list, ticking things off your project map. It's all about the use of resources and allocation. Leadership, on the other hand, is about inspiring and bringing people along on their journey. So I wanted to introduce you to Chan Master Fu Chen Yan, who was a Chinese Buddhist monk and was born on the 27th day of the second lunar month of the year 1922. And it's really important we acknowledge the differences between the calendar dates when we're talking here, because it would be very Western of me just to assume the date was, you know, the current calendar that we use in the UK. So he's also known by a different name of Mind Pure and True Emptiness, and was a leading figure. But perhaps if you look at his knowledge in the Western world, you're going to see him most commonly referenced in leadership seminars and webinars. Which is because, you know, he has a really fantastic framework to leadership, which I think we should look at just to get this started. So where we're talking about the creation of bringing people along on a journey, that can seem a little bit hippie, can't it? And we don't really understand where we're coming from with that. So let's look at what that actually means. So the first of the three traits that he says makes a good leader is humanity. And we're talking here about acting with compassion, sympathy, generosity, and within the decisions and your day-to-day working. It's also about being relatable. So we're not talking here about, you know, letting somebody get away with deadlines all the time, or not chasing up work that we need, because actually that's not compassionate to the people around you. But it is about showing an understanding to the people that you're working with, and knowing them as people rather than the resource that we see in lots of management focused sort of tasks. Clarity, having a clear direction and understanding what it is we all need to do and what we have to do and how we're going to get there. Clarity is focused around being able to have the vision that we spoke about earlier. So what is the long end goal of this project or my work? And how are we as a group of people going to get to that point? What tasks do we all need to play separately to create that clarity? And then finally, courage, being able to stand strong in situations that might be uncomfortable or scary. You want the people that you're working with to look up to you, right? You want them to be able to see you as somebody who is a figure that can be trusted, and demonstrating courage is a massive part of that. There are people in leadership positions, and trust me, I've been there, that have had to have the most uncomfortable conversations ever. The way that I do that often at Blossom in my work is that we have our set of values. And one of our values at Blossom is community, right? So I sometimes have to have the courage to have a conversation with somebody whose actions aren't bettering the community around us. It's never interesting. It's never easy to have to do something like that. But it is an essential trait of leadership, is being able to have the courage to have difficult conversations, but also have the courage to inspire people about what's next or moving forwards as well. That sometimes means bringing people on a journey that you're not 100% convinced that you're even going to get to, right? If we're talking about the courage to promote a 5-year strategy in your second year of your operations, that can be very daunting and scary to start to tell people, yeah, we're going to get there. But all of these things are part of leadership. So back to a question for you, really. Can you name some of the most inspiring leaders you've seen, heard of, or read about? And they could be from anywhere. They don't necessarily have to be workplace leaders. They could be anyone that you've ever encountered, really. Martin Luther King, that's a great one. And by the way, if it's just like my first boss, that's also totally fine. Peter Tatchell, great. Yeah, I learned that we're going for the activist vibes here, so that's very, very cool. Your current boss, that was hopefully one of my employees. Lady Phil, I love Lady Phil. Isn't Lady Phil an amazing role model? So cool. My manager, and then I can just see one last person typing. So I'll give you a sec to hit enter, and then we will move in. Moving on. And I'm loving that my managers are coming through. That's really cool. My PM who made space in the schedule to help me get breathing room as a priority. That's so cool. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so great that you've got a manager there that's willing to advocate for you, right? When we go back to looking at those traits, humanity, that they're making time to address the issues that you're facing and doing so in compassion, understanding that workload is scary, clarity helping you find time to catch up on that workload, and courage is actually removing the delegation of work and being willing to let you catch up with that. That's courage when it comes to them reporting to their higher ups. So a real fantastic example there of the framework that we were just looking at. So I really liked this quote when I was pulling this together, which says, "The leaders who inspired us, those who have a legacy beyond their lives, did so because they led with every part of their soul." I just thought that was really nice and touching. I don't have like a deep reflection on that, really. Sometimes I do, but I just felt a little bit quirky and thought I'd throw in a touching little statement into the webinar. But I think it is important that we acknowledge that the leaders that we look up to, the people that we want to engage with, that we find time for, are the ones who are wearing their heart on their sleeves. And that doesn't mean that you have to go into your workplace tomorrow and start crying and being vulnerable. But it doesn't mean that, it's about being honest about their emotions, being clear when things are struggling or tough for them. Elements like that can all make up, a leader that we look at from today all the way through for many, many years to come. And in fact, one that I really love is a reflection of Harvey Milk. So Harvey Milk was an American politician, I think one of the first, or was the first out politician, and should really know that as a queer person, shouldn't I, in America. And he gave a fantastic speech. It's known as the Hope Speech. And, to this day, it still rings true and it's still important. And that's because he was wearing his heart on his sleeve when he gave it. Fab. So, and would you believe it? The gifts don't work. That's very sad. This was supposed to be Paris Hilton running and stocking a shelf in a big pink fluffy dress. I thought we had to just camp it up a little bit for the webinar, didn't we? But let's move into looking at being queer at work for a second. So I'm obsessed with memes. They have unfortunately worked their way into this webinar. And if any of you are on TikTok these days, you'll know Project Coconut, Kamala, the Brat takeover is really trending, and something that I think we have to look at before we get too far into queerness at work is actually all that is around us. So you think you just fell out of a coconut tree, You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. And I think this is just so cool and so important, right? And I just love that someone in the comments has just caught us back to Paris Hilton with having the same dress. And yeah, I mean, I'm very jealous that you have that dress. Actually, if you ever want to share it, I'm based in Surrey. I'd love to go shopping in it. But why am I talking about an internet meme about existing in a context? Well, it's because whilst I'm going to talk to you about leadership and how your queer identity influences leadership, we cannot forget that that is just one small part of all of our identities, right? So you'll see on this map here, there are so many different things that make us who we are. We've got sexuality, skin color, socioeconomic background, whether we are disabled or our ability, our age, body size, citizenship, all of these things reflect who we are and how we as a person have levels of power versus levels of non-power, right? So power, of course, being if you exist in a patriarchal society, which we all do, if you exist in a society where racism is rife, which it is, and things like that, actually the more you fit into what is considered powerful, what's a societal norm, influences the level of power that you have, right? So somebody who has power in all of those areas that would sort of sit right in the middle, they might get nervous before an interview, but it's very unlikely that they would get nervous before an interview because they have to do things like tell somebody what their name is, or answer a question about their hair, or have to think about the fact that actually I don't have a home right now, so how am I going to give them an address when they ask for it? Things like that all influence our experience in the workplace. So whilst I am going to focus on queerness today, I just really want to reflect back to you right this second that we have to think about so much more than just that as well. So and as we go through the webinar, I hope that that becomes apparent where things might change. So, Paul, for you, a quick question. Being LGBTQA plus has no impact on my on my work life, and I want to know how strongly you agree with that question. And there again, absolutely no wrong answer, but interesting to see what people think here. So the first person to vote was strongly disagrees. The next person somewhat disagree. Very interesting. From my perspective, I, of course, strongly disagree because, as I introduced myself at the start of the webinar, I'm a career queer, but we don't all have that luxury. And I can see that we're about split between different folk here. So we'll just give the last of you a few more seconds to pop in your answers. But what we're seeing here is a real strong, agreement in the room for the most part. And please don't let me put you off if you want to disagree with me, that most of us believe that being LGBT does have an impact on our work life. So that's an interesting reflection just to get into before we move any further, is the acknowledgement that for some of us, but not all of us, there is an element of acknowledging that part of who we are impacts our work. And that's okay, right? And of course, it can do in so many different ways. If you're in the closet, for example, you might not necessarily feel comfortable having a conversation about your weekend. And as such, it's making it much harder for you to connect with colleagues. Elements such as that kind of all shape our experiences. But what are some of our, pre-work experiences as queer people, right? So a lot of us, and again, not all of us, will have been, whilst growing up, conditioned to have an element of doubt or a need to hide part of who we are, right? So phrases like it's just a phase, or I'm fine with it, but God, please don't tell your gran, or even gaslighting ourselves as children, dear God, please let me wake up and not be queer. All elements where we've actually denied or rejected who we are. And that can mean that we have a real issue in the workplace with wanting to stand up or stand out You know, it can make it difficult to want to stand up and pop your head above the parapet, because for the longest time in our childhood, teenage years, and sometimes into our early 20s, or if not longer, we spent a lot of time trying not to stand out. And now, to step up as a leader, you have to do the opposite. Can seem really scary, right? For some of us. You know, I am lucky that I think I was born and came out of the womb thwarping a fan and with a rainbow tutu on. So for most of my life, I've been very out there and refused to be sort of pushed back into the closet. But that's not the case for everybody. And even me, having grown up during a period called Section 28, which is where it was completely illegal for there to be positive stories shared about LGBTQIA plus people, meant that I was consistently concerned or worried about voicing my experiences. And I often didn't hear positive stories about LGBTQIA plus people, which again meant that I thought, well, you know, people like me, we're never going to get into leadership roles. And to be completely honest with you, at risk of getting the recording banned off of the internet, the stories that we were hearing in the news were about people like sex workers, or people who were in drug sales, or people who had unfortunately lost their lives due to abuse. We weren't hearing the positive stories that we had access to. And of course, that meant that it wasn't necessarily as easy to be open. So we all, or the majority of us, have some experience of not being able to be open about who we are. But to be a powerful leader, let's look at reframing the part of ourselves that have held us back when we're at work. Let's understand that while some people might judge us for who we are, the experiences we have as individuals are making us who we are. And that's what makes us strong and authentic leaders when we're given the opportunity to step up. And we're going to Uno reverse those negative experiences for a second, right? Let's just have a look. Resilience. If somebody has been homophobic towards you, has given you a tough time growing up, even to this day, you're getting through it, you've got through it, you've got past that experience. Now, we shouldn't all have to be strong. We shouldn't all have to, none of us should have to deal with negative behavior because of who we are. But the reality is that a lot of us do. I think it's something like 80% of trans people will experience some sort of homophobia, biphobia, or transphobia over a year. That's a lot of us, and we get through it for the vast majority of times. It's never nice, it's never easy, but we do. Adaptability. This one doesn't just ring true to queer people, it rings true to a lot of marginalized people. At some point in your life, you've probably had to read a room, whether that's you've walked into a kebab shop after a night out and you've had a few drinks and you are reading the room to see if it's safe for you to openly or camp it up a little bit, or whether you have to put on your straight voice, which I know a lot of people have, or perhaps you might choose to only go in there dressed in a certain way because it's much more easy to turn up dressed in a tracksuit, things like that. You've read a room. What that is an amazing skill in business, because it allows you to tailor the way that you react, talk, present based off of the people that you're around. And I'm not saying within that to change yourself to fit in at work, but everybody has different ways that we treat different people. And adaptability and reading a room is about being able to identify that. You probably have fantastic listening skills. At some point, you've probably had to sit next to a relative, maybe a dodgy uncle at Christmas, or someone like that, telling you about your identity and knowing that they, or thinking that they know more than you. And you've probably had to sit through and listen to that at some point. You have developed fantastic listening skills, even if you don't often use them. Advocacy, you've probably felt it, if not done it yourself, right? You probably know how fantastic it feels when somebody fights your corner, when somebody is looking out for you. Or on the flip side of that, you've been at a pride event You have stood up when another person has received ill treatment. You've had to become an advocate, and you've probably had to have people advocate for you. But that is a fantastic skill to have when you're trying to build trust, compassion, or leadership for people that you are leading. And authenticity, you've bloody well earned it. you know, we've all been through the process of doubting, questioning, being unsure about who we are. You've earned the right to be authentic. And a lot of people will step into a workplace not authentic. They will wear the same suit as everybody else, the same shirt, the same trousers as everybody else, and they'll blend in. Being a leader is not about blending in, and you've earned that right to be and turn up as yourself. Back to Chan Masteryan's thing that we've just thing framework that we've just spoken about, and let's just reflect on how being openly LGBTQIA plus in itself in your workplace is reflecting on you as a leader, or your leading abilities, or your leadership abilities. Once you're open, you do create, whether you like it or not, more humanity around you as a person, because you're inviting people to see behind your professional facade. You're inviting people to see an assumption that they make about everybody, which is that we live in a cis heteronormative society. So the chances are they have assumed that you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or that you're cisgender, and you're inviting them behind that. You instantly become more relatable, more complex, and real. And yes, you can face barriers, but they also see that you've had to overcome barriers to get to where you are. So we're already creating a sense of humanity behind yourself. Clarity. You begin to signify that around you, it is okay to be authentic. That in itself leads to people being willing to innovate and create disruption within a system. That's fantastic. If you're running a project, or if you're running a team or a program, if you have a team of people that think it's okay to come up with ideas and get something wrong, but you're already a fantastic leader, because you are inviting innovation in. And when we have a space where we can come up with new ideas, that's when we start to see fantastic projects in the workplace, and progress, and innovating to make sure that businesses are keeping up with the times. So it's all about the culture that you could set for your identity. And courage. You've demonstrated to your team that standing out from the crowd isn't a bad thing. You're embedding courage within your team, but actually you're showing your own courage as well. You're showing that you're willing to step up in a place where it's not necessarily the safest to be queer all the time. I mean, we don't all know how we'll be perceived in the workplace, and you've still done it. And that in itself is showing courage. It's showing that you are willing to actually, over everything else, over your workplace, be authentic and stand up. And that is a lot of courage, whether or not we take it for granted on a daily basis or not. It's a significant trait. So we're going to look at some toolkits for the last sort of 10 minutes or so, and then we can throw open some questions if people have them. We're going to start with something that's important to acknowledge, which is the most important tool in your toolkit is being authentic, right? It's being yourself. People, when it comes to a leader, are going to engage with you if they feel you, if they feel that you are open about who you are, that there is a connection between you. If we go back to the people that were talking about their managers as being the best leader, you probably feel positive towards them as a person, right? You probably have a bit more of a connection with them. I highly doubt that you jump into a one-to-one and just start talking about work every single time. There's a connection where you're talking about your personal life, be that your cats, your dogs, what you did at the weekend, all the things that start to build up a connection and demonstrate authenticity between the two of you. It's not that being authentic means you have to come out and be queer straight away, but there are other ways that you can be authentic, right? Talking about hobbies and things like that. And also, when it comes to work in a workplace or beyond, being authentic is about acknowledging sometimes that we got to have this conversation, and it's a hard conversation for both of us to have. or we have a terrible decision to make, but we're going to make it as a group of employees together so that we all feel comfortable and confident with the decision that we're making. Authenticity is about not hiding behind positive, toxic positivity, or hiding behind a screen of professionalism. It's about building those bonds and connections. Now, what I wanted to look at here is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if you're a leader, then you're going to have people looking up to you, and they're going to have different needs. And as a powerful leader, you've got to be considering about how are you fulfilling the needs that these people experience. So we have lots of different needs, right? So be that food, actually, food, drink, things like that. Well, they're getting paid. So most workplaces, actually not all workplaces, but the majority of which are actually already fulfilling that sort of very basic need. Safety. We're talking about physical and psychological safety for a powerful leader. So we're talking about things like doing an occupational health assessment for your staff to make sure that they understand that there is a working from home equipment that's available for them. But it's also about acknowledging that you're there to have uncomfortable conversations with. You want to be the leader where you can say, God, isn't this stressful? Should we do something about it? And then your colleagues being willing to voice that opinion too. Love and belongingness. So I don't think you should kick every work day off by giving your colleagues a smooch. That would be quite inappropriate. But there are different ways that you can build love and belongingness into your workplace, right? Gratitude is a fantastic example of this. How are you expressing gratitude to your colleagues? How are you telling them well done? How are you acknowledging a fantastic piece of work that's finished? Or the opposite, how are you showing compassion and kindness when things are difficult or tough? A really nice example of this I experienced from a line manager who actually turned around to me once and said, things must be really tough. I read the Daily Mail, oops, and I've been really aware of how many anti-trans news articles there's been in the Daily Mail since the start of the weekend. And are you okay? Do you need someone to talk to? Do you need like a half a day off to go and look after your well-being? Those sort of things start to build love and belonging. But esteem is equally as important. And we already started when we spoke about gratitude, right? But building people's self-esteem and also the broader team's esteem is really important. It can be so draining to look at poor results week after week. If sales are going back, it can be very difficult, very easy to slip into, as a leader, not again, that we've dropped sales, we're $2,000 down on last year. And whilst it's important to focus on positive and negatives, and it would be wrong of us to not acknowledge when things aren't good, it's also about building confidence that we can get back. So esteem building in a workplace might be like coming up with an idea to boost sales figures and getting people rallied behind that, really getting people aware of the solutions and getting them involved in creating those solutions as well. They're all important ways that we can start to build esteem. And one of the best examples that I've seen about building that in a colleague is not to micromanage, is to not hold their hand, is sometimes to let colleagues try things, get it wrong, and move on. And at the top there, we have individuals reaching their fullest potential. Okay, so that involves all of the things that we've just spoken about together, but it also involves things like spending time training, supporting your team, building up their own skill sets, elements such as that build that self-actualization. I can't even say it, hence why I skipped it, but important part of building that leader. Now, we spoke briefly about imposter syndrome as well. And this is something that is a barrier for almost every single young adult that I come in contact with who wants to be a leader. Imposter syndrome is basically feeling like you're not good enough, It's things like self-doubt, not feeling like you have the skills, not feeling that you're accomplished enough, or or perhaps not sure really where you stand. And I'll be honest with you, I experience imposter syndrome so regularly. I'm CEO of a charity. I am probably half the age of the majority of my peers in CEO positions, and I don't know what I'm doing most of the time, admittedly. It's my first time being a CEO. I've watched some amazing leaders, and I feel that without the recognition that the organization has grown in income by about 14,000%, that we're reaching about 400% more service users on a yearly basis, yet sometimes I still don't feel good enough. So imposter syndrome affects the majority of us. Even if you look at somebody and you think they are a high flyer, they are doing an amazing job, imposter syndrome can impact anybody. And it's actually really quite high within the type of people who are probably watching this today. 34% of lesbian, gay, and bi people of all ages say that they experience it regularly. 64% of trans and non-binary people say that they experience it regularly. And 86% of under 30s say that they experience imposter syndrome at work. So it's a big demographic. There is a lot of us that experience imposter syndrome, which in itself should be a massive red flag to leaders that it exists, but it does, and at a very high percentage. And how can we overcome that? Facts. Focus on your track record. Reread your manager's appraisals of you. Set quantitative, smart, so measurable goals, and just consistently look at what you're doing. And this is really hard to do as a leader, because if you remember back to the start of the webinar, where I said leadership was about setting a long-term vision, often the best leaders forget to look backwards because they are so caught up in what is next. If you are wanting to be a sustainable, long-lasting leader and overcome that imposter syndrome, you have got to be looking back, just so that you can continue to look forwards. Look at what you've achieved. Decide how I've achieved that. What does that mean for me? What is next? Feelings. It's important to be talking openly about imposter syndrome, not just for your own sake, but also for your colleagues' sakes as well. It's important to consider what else might be at play, and you can only really determine that when you start talking. So, it could be things like, wow, you're so good at this, when you talk to a colleague who actually gives you, or might be a part of the influencing of your imposter syndrome because you see them as this amazing, powerful colleague. They might either give you the opportunity to watch what they're doing and learn from them, or they might respond to you and say, oh, really? Well, I thought you're really good at this. So that's just one thing to start, but it's also important that we get it out in the open, because even if you're a leader, for the majority of us, majority of leaders will still have somebody, hierarchically above them. I still have a board of trustees sitting above me, despite me being the leader of the organization. And it's important that we voice and say, I experienced this, so that they can look out for you. They can keep a track of your mental health. They can keep a track of how you're performing, but also they can point out when you're doing really well. And then finally, collaborate. Find a coach or a mentor who can support you. Maybe try reverse mentoring to gain confidence. So reverse mentoring is where, rather than focusing on workplace skills, you focus on interpersonal skills, or maybe even focus on your experience as an LGBT person, and you mentor somebody who's more senior than you in a workplace. It is a fantastic way to build confidence in your ability to train, to teach, and to lead other people, or just work more closely with your colleagues. When you adapt to being collaborative and sharing and doing things together, you often see the best of each other, and it gives you the opportunity to shine amongst your peers when you're doing a fantastic job, and learn from them at the same time. Well, how can we help you, is where I wanted to end my ramble. Well, What's really important is to acknowledge that there are not enough queer people in senior leadership positions. Something that I've always said is that you can't be what you can't see. And I know that's a cheesy phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but it is important that we do start to have the future leaders of tomorrow stepping up. So, if you are aged 16 to 30, you live in the UK, and you are currently either out of work or in what we would call a junior position, so you're not a manager, we can give you absolutely free one-to-one mentoring. You get 4 sessions from our coaches, which is all about building your own confidence and understanding what sets you apart, what makes you special, how do you pitch yourself. And then we're going to connect you with a mentor, hopefully, not always, but hopefully, in whatever sector you want to work in. And we will get them with you at least once a month for the rest of the year. So, roughly 8 sessions, all for free, with the goal of setting you up to thrive in your first job or your first management position job. If you're currently in a management position job and you are maybe struggling or want a bit of extra help, we can also support you too. So please, if you can't get sponsored, you don't have to, but we do ask that if workplaces can sponsor your space, it helps us give more spaces to people that are really struggling for work. But there's no pressure. We would never want finances to be a reason why you can't join us. So both of those schemes are completely available for free, and all you've got to do is email across to employability@blossom.lgbt, and we can support you with that. If you wouldn't mind, I've got a few questions before we move on to the Q&A just about this session. You can tick as many that you think apply. So free, if you tick all 3, then that's great for me. I'm allowed to have a slice of cake after the webinar, but no pressure if not, because I will probably get one anyway. I just want to know how you felt the session went today. So Oscar, please, would like to send you an email about it. You're very welcome to email me. So if you emailed the employability@blossom.lgbt email address, then our team will be able to help you there. I am glad that people have learned things today. Right. Fab. Thank you all for your feedback. And we're going to use the last 10 minutes or so of this session to run through some of your questions. So look at this. The first question is, when did you first see yourself as a leader? And if I'm honest with you, I totally fell into leadership. It was not something that I was planning to do at all. My first leadership position was at a chain of plumbers merchants, and you should have seen me. I was like very flamboyantly running into this plumbers merchants in the construction industry with butch builders and was 100% myself, and that was my superpower when I was in that job. I would be 100% authentic, and I would use that to my advantage to have banter. If a colleague hadn't paid for their if a customer hadn't paid, I would tease them about it. And I always have used my identity as a skill set here. I can also see that these are a few questions from the same person, so I'm going to just move on to some of the other ones, but please, there is no pressure to ask questions, and I will try and get back to a few of them. How do people balance burnout with the additional pressures that can come with diversity representation in senior careers? This is so important. This is such a powerful question, right? It's so easy to do so. The second that you step up and you're authentic, you'll often see people popping up who are going to say things like, oh, cool, so you're like the only queer in the senior leadership team. Could you help us with our HR policy? Do you think our parental leave policy works right? Can you help us with that? Like the additional bits and bobs. Or it's about actually a great job, but one that is additional work. Could you be our senior sponsor for the LGBT staff network? Things like that. Alongside actually the stresses of just constantly seeing who you are in the news, from like angry people, um, elements like that are tough to deal with, right? They're really difficult. And firstly, it's about acknowledging that with burnout, it's about being in touch with yourself. So you need to be able to feel and understand basically what's going on around you. How are you feeling at all times? It's a really important, it's imperative, in fact, to make sure that you're practicing time off, shutting off. One of the best tools that I've ever used when it comes to managing workload from a position of being in a leadership position with sort of high demand, be that any form of demand, is a tool called the Covey Matrix. So COVEY. And that matrix is a really great tool for plotting how tasks are important, not important, urgent, not urgent. I do one as a minimum once a week, often most days. And I will sit there before I start anything and look at what is very important and very urgent. And that will be the tasks that I will start with. What I then do is I acknowledge that there are only a certain amount of hours in the day, and I'll get done what I get done from there, work my way backwards with the goal of getting to the tasks that are, actually not very urgent and not super important. But knowing that those tasks, the world isn't going to implode if I don't get there, is a really nice way to manage that. Regular breaks as well. Pomodoro technique is a fantastic tool for making sure that you are taking time to rest throughout your workday. So one that you might also want to check out. And I saw one, as a CEO yourself, what tips would you give to a young person trying to create a startup? Love this question. Firstly, it's a lot of hassle. One of the best things I've ever done, though, if I'm honest with you. So one of the best decisions I ever made in my life, in my opinion, was to start something up myself. And it has made me the happiest that I have ever been. That said, starting something up is a lot of hassle. It's a lot of hard work. You've got to be ready for it. And no doubt you will be able to do it. I think most people will. But just be prepared for that. My top tips is firstly to surround yourself with people that want to support you and can support you. I learned very quickly that I have amazing strengths, but I also have significant weaknesses, and that's completely fine. Not everyone's going to be great at everything. So I chose to surround myself with volunteers, friends, people who had skill sets that were really beneficial. And even to this day, right, I have a board of directors at Blossom. So what that basically means is that whilst I'm the big cheese, we've got people who sit on the board of trustees who do oversight and governance. So they look over what I've done and they go, was that really the smartest idea? Like, did you really want to do it that way? Things like that. And they all have skill sets that I do not have. And that's the most challenging experience ever, to go from being the boss of everything to then having people who are telling you no, but a great thing. Likewise, when you do have people around you, creating an environment where they can challenge you in that same way. I love it when my staff question me. It's one of the best things because they have brilliant ideas. So making sure that I create that environment. The other thing that I would say when you're starting something up is to keep in mind that you are going to get pulled in lots of different directions. So you've got to have a strategy and a vision, understand where you are going. So whether that is what I always try to do, to have a 5-year personal and professional strategy, one that looks at me as an individual, where do I want to be? And one that looks at the organization that I'm working within, where do I want that organization to be? And I work it back from there. And when I find myself being pulled around and overwhelmed, I often go back to that strategy. I set a really ambitious one with £2,000 in the bank account. I said, I'm going to earn generate turnover £250,000 in the next 5 years. Never thought I would do it. I did it. Um, and that was because, and I believe actually it was a really great new person in Blossom called Make said about the importance, right, of when you set an impossible goal and reframe it, it starts to feel possible. And that's totally mangled her really cool quote, but it's really true. It's about looking forwards in that space. So the last question that we're going to take is just the LGBT staff network tips one. So just to establish a little bit of credibility here, something that Blossom does through our work, which is actually one of my main areas of work on a day-to-day basis, is we work with businesses. I used to say across the country, but we actually have a few really cool global clients now, who work with us on a training basis, consultancy basis, a lot of them on annual partnership bases. And we build guidance based off of basically building what have our young adults that are on our mentoring scheme told us, and how can we change it so that the negative things that they tell us aren't as negative. So we work a lot with businesses in this space. And with LGBT staff networks, I think something that is so often missed out or forgotten about is actually the power of creating collaborative social well-being focused spaces, right? So businesses across the UK, actually across the world, are having a nightmare in retaining young people. So something like LGBTQA plus young adults are half the amount of time in a job, whereas any Gen Zer is only about 12 months in said job. So businesses are really struggling. And I think one of the most important things about LGBT or any diversity network is about building the culture of belonging in that workplace where you feel connected to colleagues, part of something. It's a really fantastic way to start to embed a culture of belonging where people can start to step up as leaders, and use that space to actually not just be a space for LGBTQA plus people, but actually a talent retention tool, which I know might sound a bit cold if you're part of a network because you want to make things better, but actually it's an important part of retaining staff in an organization. So I often encourage networks. Whilst it's great to be advising on policies, it's great to be building new processes, it's great to be filling in an equality index, focus as well on, or before any of that, actually, on connecting on a fundamental basis. And then look at what's next once you've done that. Fab. So look at that for time, eh? Brilliant. Thank you all so much for joining this webinar today. And I'm going to finish on time because no one wants to work late, do they? God, it's 2024. We all want to finish on time. You can join us on our one-to-one mentoring scheme. You can email employability@blossom.lgbt. If not me, one of my amazing team members will get back in touch with you to book in your first appointment with us, where we can run through some screening questions and make sure that we understand what you want to get out of this so that it's the best possible experience for you. Lovely people in the chat making some really great comments across all of the platforms. Thank you so much, Sally, on LinkedIn. Dan, it's great to see you as well. It's Experts Europe. Looking forward to an email from you. I'm sorry that I don't know what name to refer to you as. Probably a good thing if you're trying to be anonymous there. So thank you for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to next month. Next month, we have a fantastic webinar on conflict resolution. So do make sure that you sign up for that. You can email us if you want to get in touch, if you can't find those details. Likewise, we've got some fantastic events coming up in person. We've got a gender affirming workplace makeup session coming up very soon, where you can come along and learn how to use makeup for, whether you are a trans man, trans woman, cis man, cis woman, or a non-binary person, how makeup can be used in the workplace to make you feel more confident. So many other fantastic workshops, arts and heritage programs coming up, and of course our weekly social space in Woking in Surrey as well. So do get in touch if you're interested in any of our services. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Have a lovely week.